Hey guys, welcome to the screencast. This is for AP Biology. We're on Unit 3, Cellular Energetics, in class right now. Our focus within cellular energetics is like getting a handle on metabolism and the action of enzymes. On my last screencast, I talked about concept 6.1 from our text, and today I'm picking up on 6.2. So let's take a moment and kind of look over the heading because it really gives us a good overall picture of what we're going to be diving into. It says the free energy change of a reaction tells us whether or not the reaction occurs spontaneously. So there's a couple things to break down here. One is going to be this phrase free energy. You're going to hear that over and over and over again within this particular screencast. And then you're going to hear the term spontaneous or non spontaneous as well. So let's tie this to the work we've already done and what's coming forward. So within metabolism, we know that that word metabolism is referencing all the chemical reactions that occur within a living organism. And based on the previous screencast, we know that means we know some reactions are going to cause buildup to happen, meaning like we're taking smaller molecules and building them up into larger ones. We also know that's going to involve breakdown reactions. So when those reactions occur, basically we're saying there's going to be changes in the amount of free energy that's available, and they determine whether we would reference or classify the reaction as something we would call spontaneous or not. All right, so let's dive into how you're going to see free energy in a lot of different scenarios. This delta G, or what looks like a triangle in the capital letter G, that is referencing change in free energy. So you've got a description of free energy here on the screen you're welcome to grab. I like to think of free energy, in addition to the way it's expressed here, as like the amount of energy available to do work. So it's the energy that's being released to the environment, and it can actually be used to do work. Um, it says here, free energy is a portion of a system's energy that can do work when temperature and pressure are in uniform throughout, as in a living cell. So we're talking about in cells, reactions are going to occur. Those reactions are going to change the amount of energy that's available to do work. More energy might be available, less energy might be available. That's going to be our delta G. Okay, we're going to notice that delta G is either going to be positive or negative. There is an equation right here in the middle that is no longer part of the AP Biology formula page. So in the past, students had to actually calculate delta G. Now we don't necessarily focus on crunching the numbers, but instead having like a better overall concept of what delta G, or change in free energy, actually communicates. So from this point forward, I want you to think about like, what does a negative delta G imply? What does a positive delta G imply? Or if we were to flip it around and you were given a scenario, could you actually say, okay, from this scenario, I know the change in free energy here would be negative, or I know the change in free energy here is going to be positive. All right, so let's dive in a little bit deeper. Free energy is the measure of a system's instability, its tendency to change into a more stable state. So I like to use a Jenga tower for an example. Like, you might see what looks like an organized something, but this so-called organized structure might be really unstable, and it's going to have a tendency to break apart. And that's why the game is fun in the first place, and go to a more stable state, which looks like blocks over all over the ground. And so what might be more stable might also look more unorganized. And so for myself, my understanding, I have to remind myself of that stability is not a picture of when it looks nice and neat and put together, but it's more about its tendency to change. So like a Jenga tower that looks organized is highly unstable, most likely, and then the blocks on the ground are in a more stable state. And so when we're talking about free energy, we know that we're also referencing like changes in stability of molecules that are moving either more stable or less stable based on whether it's a buildup reaction or a breakdown reaction. Okay, so I've got 3 different examples that I want to dive into. So you'll see these one at a time, and then you can come back to this portion of the screencast if you want to kind of reference this text, which is good. But I think it's a little much before we look at the 3 examples independently. So let's look at the first. In this first example, you're seeing a diver standing on a diving board, and then obviously the diver's taken off. And so through just gravity, objects are moving in a spontaneous direction from a higher altitude to a lower one. What does that mean? Well, in this picture, because of the person's position on the diving board, this person is showing like an example of potential energy that could be used to do work. And so that work right now is like transporting the body to the water, right? And so we see kinetic energy in this picture as there's movement taking place. It makes sense to call this a spontaneous reaction, meaning we don't have to put additional energy into this scenario in order for this reaction to take place. Instead, it would take a lot more energy input into the system if I were instead having to get out of the water and then climb back up the ladder, or if I was pushing a rock uphill. That would not spontaneously occur. But kind of like our Jenga table, it makes more sense that something in this position would over time move to this lower position. Okay, this one I like. This one you can think of like dropping food coloring into a beaker of water. We would probably assume that over time those drops of food coloring would spread out naturally or diffuse throughout the solution. So it says molecules in a drop of dye diffuse until they are randomly dispersed. This again is an example of a spontaneous reaction. A spontaneous reaction is one that's going to be energetically favorable, so it's not requiring an additional input of energy from the environment, but instead it would probably naturally happen over time. And these spontaneous reactions are the ones that we're going to associate with a negative change in free energy. So you're going to see like negative delta G's here on this in just a moment. Okay, our third example, I really like this one. This shows you a picture of a glucose molecule. So the glucose molecule reminds me again of like a Jenga tower. It looks so-called organized, but it is more unstable in this state than it is in this one. So we've got one glucose molecule. It's broken apart. You can see it's broken apart into water molecules. It's also being broken apart into carbon dioxide. So everything that you're seeing on the top, all of the atoms on the top are present on the bottom. Um, and this chemical reaction, again, that occurs in respiration is another example of a spontaneous reaction. And I'm not saying that it doesn't require energy to break things apart. I am saying it's energetically favorable, meaning it typically doesn't take a large input of energy from the outside in order to force it to happen. Okay. The word equilibrium. So when you see equilibrium, I hope our cells are not in equilibrium. Basically, we've got a lot of things coming in and out of our cells. We've got constant changes, constant reactions, and as those reactions take place, they are constantly changing the amount of energy available. They're constantly changing the stability of the system. And so if a cell was in equilibrium, it would actually be dead. So due to metabolism, unless a cell has died, you're not going to see a cell in equilibrium. Okay, sorry for the pause. I had to tell some of you hello that were actually coming into my class. Okay, so I'm picking up. I'm having to remind myself where I was. Free energy and metabolism. Okay, let's see here. Oh, endergonic, exergonic. Okay, so this is a really important point. Some reactions we're going to call endergonic, some we're going to call exergonic. You're going to see descriptions. You're also going to see pictures. And then I've got like a really quick little animation that some of you might say is helpful. So I'm going to show it to you as well. It's like a 10 to 15 second little animation. So let's start with word parts. Make this simple. Exer meaning like exit, ender meaning like within or inside. So an exergonic reaction is going to be one that releases free energy to the outside. And we do refer to those exergonic reactions as spontaneous. The endergonic reaction, on the other hand, is not going to release or is not going to have a change of free energy that's released to the outside environment in order to do work. Instead, it would store. So as far as which one's negative and which one's positive, I mean, you can see it on the screen, but I think it's easier to like actually see it in context. So I'm going to move forward and then I'll obviously talk about which one's positive and negative. Okay, because I'm on Google Slides, you can't see that animation. So I'm going to swing over here and hit play. I know you've lost.
Cells contain many different.
You've lost my face. What I'm hoping is that you can still see the animation, and I'm actually going to. Yeah, I'm going to keep the volume on. So I'm going to hit play for a moment, and I might cut it off in the middle of the description. But I'm hoping you can see the movement of these molecules If not, that'll be a point of learning for me. And I'm sorry if you can't skip over the next 30 seconds. I'm really hoping you can see this. If not, I'll figure out how to make it better.
Molecules that can engage in a variety of chemical reactions. When molecules react, for example, when they collide and exchange parts, their atoms and bonds are rearranged.
So, what I was hoping for you to see at this point, I'm going to go back to our slideshow. Okay. So, what I was hoping for you to see is that these molecules are in motion. We know this, and that they come into contact with one another. So they collide or they bump. We'll call it bumping. And then some of them bind. So you might have wondered, well, why did this triangle not match with this one? Like why are they binding together? And so you're going to see a huge emphasis on structure and function. And the binding of molecules is obviously going to be based on like the edges of the molecule itself and like little pockets or grooves were almost like puzzle pieces that they can actually fit together. So sometimes molecules bump and they just continue to like bump around. And then sometimes they bump and cause movement that causes other ones to bind together. So that was the overall kind of idea I was hoping for you to see there. And you might have seen like starbursts that were almost like energy that was being applied to cause some reactions to take place. Now, here's the two graphs that I told you I would show in reference to endergonic and exergonic reactions. And I will also show you these one at a time so we can talk a little bit more in detail about them. The first one being the exergonic reaction, the last one or the second one being the endergonic. So let's stay with the word parts. Exer means outside. So I want you to really pay attention to right here. In an exergonic reaction, energy is released. Okay, energy is released. So an exergonic reaction is going to cause energy to be released to the environment in order to do work. I want you to think of this one like a piggy bank that we have broken and we've taken money out in just a moment. On the other hand, endergonic reactions, ender means within or inside. So this is going to basically store energy. It's not going to be released in order to do work in this one. Instead, it's going to store energy. And storing energy means we're going to build molecules up. That is not a spontaneous reaction. So you'll see like non-spontaneous as a word that is often connected to endergonic reactions. So let's look at them one at a time. Okay, so here again is the exergonic reaction. I want you to imagine, before you get too deep into the graph, I want you to imagine you have like a piggy bank. And I'm using piggy bank because now with bank accounts, like you used to put money in a bank account and then you had to actually physically take the money out. It's not like that anymore. There's all kind of digital ways to spend money. So I'm wanting to think of something physical like a piggy bank. And let's say that you're putting coins in or you're putting dollars in and you've got money inside of the bank. As long as it's inside of the bank, it is not available to be used. You're saving, you're adding up, you're increasing your budget that's in your bank account or your piggy bank, but it's not available to use. It's stored in the piggy bank. In this so-called exergonic reaction, if I were to break apart the piggy bank, let's say that I had saved up $500 and it was in this piggy bank. If I break apart this piggy bank and I take out 300, my balance would have gone down. My balance would go down. It would go, if I took out $300, my balance started at 500. So here's like my analogy here. Let's say this is $500. And then I took out the money. So my bank account went down. It went from 500 to 200 because I took $300 out. So the change in G, or the change in free energy, is a negative number. It was a negative number. I took money out of the bank. But because I took money out of the bank, now it's in my hand and it's available to actually spend. So making that analogy here to this exergonic reaction, and an exergonic reaction, and these are catabolic reactions, there's going to be molecules that are broken apart, and during this catabolic reaction, energy is going to be released to the outer environment. So you're going to have a change in free energy that we call negative as it's released to the outside environment. And so a lot of students get this mixed up. They think, well, if it's released to the outside environment, it's a positive thing. You're not like classifying it as good or bad, or you're not saying it's positive because it's present. Instead, it's the change in free energy in the system. So just like the change in the bank account, the budget or the bank account goes down as energy is taken out, but then it can be used. Same situation here. Exergonic reactions, they're going to be breakdown reactions that result in a negative change in G, which means energy is available to do work. Okay. Let's see here. What to do here. Now let's go to the endergonic. In the endergonic reaction, on the other hand, you're going to not release free energy to the outer environment, but instead energy is required. This does not happen spontaneously, and the energy is basically going to get stored in the molecule. So if I were to, you'll see the word energy coupling later, if I were to take the energy that was released from this reaction and somehow find a way to store it in another molecule, then I would have taken so-called that money back and put it back into the piggy bank. You're not going to see a negative change in free energy here. You're going to see a positive change. So this positive delta G right here, like we started with this amount of free energy and now it's increased. It's increased in the system because it's kept in the system and it's stored inside of the molecule. So again, really quick, exergonic reactions have a negative delta G, negative change in free energy, and energy is released in order to do work. And these endergonic reactions, you're going to see a positive delta G, and energy is not available to do that work. Okay. I think I am. Yep, planned on skipping these. This is a quick point. Equilibrium is not something you're going to use to describe cells. They're not in equilibrium. We have constant inflow, outflow of materials coming into and out of cells. And in fact, a cell that has reached equilibrium is a dead cell. Like it's not possible with metabolism for a cell to be in equilibrium. And then we are not looking. Okay, right here. Catabolic pathway. This is a term that I used earlier. Catabolic pathways release free energy in a series of reactions. And the product of each reaction is the reactant for the next, preventing the system from reaching equilibrium. So I'm thinking all the way back. If I were to scroll all the way back to a slide, see, I'm on slide 48. I've got to remind myself of where to go back to, but makes me think of this picture. So let's say in this metabolic pathway that it was like a breakdown reaction, for example, that whatever was made in or broken down into B then helped, kind of kick off this reaction that would get us to C and ultimately D. Go back to where I was. So again, catabolism is referencing a metabolic pathway where polymers are breaking down into monomers. And so that's that release in free energy. And that's why you're going to have that negative change in energy. Okay, this leads us to concept 6.3. This will be our next topic on now using that energy in order to do work. And you can see that concept that'll come up next. I hope this screencast was helpful to you.